Hi everyone, Dan Gunner from Insane Forensics. Welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday, where every week we try to give something to help your security program. And we're glad to be back. We've taken some time off, but we've actually planned out an exciting series for the next year or so. And so we're going to get back into the groove. And to start off by doing that, we're going to talk on a hot topic that we hear a lot, that we've talked about with people a lot, and that's the difference between resilience and restoration in cybersecurity. You know, resilience is becoming a buzzword, so there's a lot of definitions out there. We're going to anchor both on NIST and talk about what it practically means. And then we'll kind of talk about how restoration ties into that resilience piece. So starting out with the initial definition, right? So resilience, right? The ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions, withstand, rapidly recover from disruptions, the ability, again, to deal with both deliberate attacks, with accidents, with naturally occurring threats, and with incidents. So, resilience is basically your ability for when stuff happens to be able to respond to that quickly and deal with it. Resilience might be thought of from the IT side of, hey, how resilient is my domain controller to this event? How resilient is, my router to a flood of traffic, right? How resilient is maybe this part of my network to some force, to some outside pressure that's put on it. If you go into like industrial control systems, right, you might take resilience and say, how resilient is this refinery network? How resilient is this power generation network? When I consider both the digital threats, the physical threats, really anything that environment faces. It doesn't just have to be digital, right? Resilience is about the ability for whatever the business, use for that network actually is. Resilience is the ability for that to, stay up kind of under all of those adverse conditions or things possible, right? So resilience is a state that's both, you'll hear some people say left of boom, right of boom, right? Left of boom being before that attack happens, before there's an impact. Boom being that event where something happens, and then right of boom being after that attack, right? Resilience really deals with that, like, hey, kind of the good times when you don't think anything's going on through the actual event itself and after. Restoration on the other hand, and we're going to use NIST 834. There actually is no formal definition in NIST or other publications out there, but what you'll see when you read through the NIST publications, when you read through some of the other publications, restoration really comes into that side of how do you return a system? How do you return operations back to 100%, getting back to that critical mass, after a disruption, right? What we commonly hear about is like you'll have, a certain point of recovery. Some people will say, hey, recovery is maybe getting to a co-op site to where you're maybe doing operations at a partial efficiency of full, or you're doing operations in another area where it's safer to do it. And so co-op sites are generally geographically separated sites. Sometimes some groups are even like, hey, let's make sure it's on a different power grid. Let's make sure it's not dependent on utilities to where if I lose that utility, I lose my whole operations, right? And so restoration is the act of getting your process back up entirely to 100%. So restoration in that fact, it does overlap resilience, right? Because to be truly resilient, you need that piece of restoration of saying, hey, when stuff does happen, we're able to get stuff back to 100%, to that full productivity in time. But again, what I'll emphasize both on, resilience and restoration here is it's not just about the IT systems, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that business operation that you're looking at that those computers are controlling, right? And that doesn't just have to be an industrial, right? With industrial, it's easy to say, hey, this is a big physical refinery. Hey, this is a power generation plant. Yes, you have the physics of the problem to see it, but this could be restoring a HR part. This could be restoring billing systems. Something that not a lot of people, openly talk about. There's a good group that talk about it is, people are quick to kind of throw that, hey, this is an industrial system or this is an IT system, Well, then you ask them and it's like, well, what about this billing system? And they're like, oh, well, that sounds like IT. And it's like, well, if that billing system goes out and that utility can't actually generate bills off of usage or track how much stuff people are using, utilities generally probably not going to give away stuff for free. And so, when you talk about restoration, you can talk about, again, that's a business process. That ability to generate bills, to track usage, to invoice customers, that might actually be, an IT side part of dealing with the restoration plan, right? When you're like, okay, we need to get that back up because we can't run, the actual industrial side without having this side up. So again, resilience deals with that side of, preparing for, working through, having a plan, dealing with recovery from any type of adversity, to where restoration really is that piece on the end of how quick can I get back on my feet when I'm cleaning things up. So again, we'll use NIST 834 Rev 1 today. So when we talk about plans to sustain and recover operations, there's different types. And what we have here is it's a table 2-2, the types of plan here. You have plans you hear about a lot, right? Things like business continuity plan, right? How we're going to have procedures for sustaining those business operations, right? You have that co-op plan, continuity of operations. How are we going to do operations maybe temporarily from an offsite place? How are we going to do operations safely, if we have to deal with either an environmental or other security risk or other risk in that environment, right? Crisis comm plans, right? How is your organization going to communicate internally, externally? What does that look like? Are lawyers going to have to be involved? Is this regulated communication? Are we going to get fined in some way, right? So right now, as I'm recording this, the breach on MGM and hacktivist groups attacking MGM, right? It's important to know those casinos are regulated entities by the state, right? Those regulated entities are things like, hey, if you call a state gambling hotline, they're kind of regulated on being like, hey, if you called that state gambling addiction hotline and said, hey, don't let me gamble, and someone gambles, well, you might actually be on the hook to the state to, pay some fine or have to pay some remuneration for violating what essentially is state law by this state gaming convention, right? And so how you communicate that when you're in that crisis, right? The words you use, because once you communicate something out, once you tell an outside party about stuff, you kind of lose control of that narrative, right? So crisis communication plans, when you're talking about those, other critical thing. Critical infrastructure plan, we're not going to talk about this today. It's a type of plan specific for OT or in industrial systems. What I'll note though is that you shouldn't just say, hey, we'll put the industrial things, we'll put the cyber physical things down in that plan. No, again, all of these plans are about your business process. So these people that are like, hey, industrial operations are separate, they're unique. Yes, they are unique. But again, this is all about your business operations. And so calling everything unique is actually not helping you. You need to think about all of your operations in all of these plans. The core of what we're going to talk about today is what people commonly think of, and another one when we get into restoration here. Cyber Incident Response Plan. We've done a video on this before. Definitely check it out. It's a few videos before this one that we put up, right? But what does it look like when we're mitigating cyber attacks, right? These are going to be very tailored kind of to the things that incident responders and others do. And the granularity on these plans might not get to the business continuity, to the how you recover business operations as much as some of the plans we'll talk about next, right? And so certainly an IR plan is a part of kind of this planning process that you'll do, but it's not the only part, right? Incident response is only a little bit of recovering and restoring operations. Disaster recovery plan. This is a big one you hear also, right? So what are our procedures for relocating systems to that alternate location, right? Using it for the co-op, right? The big one we'll talk about today is the Information System Contingency Plan, right? This is the plan that mainly deals with recovery. So again, we talked about the incident response plan and that being a lot about the incident response. Hey, let me figure out exactly what happened. Let me try to isolate, remediate, clean up parts of this system. Well, that IR plan doesn't go through restoring your business all the way back to 100%. And so the information system contingency plan is the key bit that gets into, hey, once the incident response case closes and we're still at partial operations, this is what we're going to do to get operations back all the way up. And then the occupant emergency plan, we're not going to talk about that one today. The other thing I should note on this planning, again, none of these are required by organizations. This is how the federal government does it. But this is a good thing to learn from, to say, okay, I need elements of, what the government's doing, obviously multiple plans. You probably can combine and merge some of these, but you'll definitely want to say, like, okay, if I'm not going to have all 8, there's probably elements of some of the other ones I don't specifically have that I want to push down, right? Because again, you don't just want an incident response plan. You also want that information systems contingency plan, so you can really think through and work through how to integrate and how to get that part of your business back together. So again, the information system contingency plan, right? Right, you can look on the left there. So it's important to have a plan to withstand hazards and sustain missions. What's also important with this plan, right, is rather than just thinking about threats, right, rather than thinking about vulnerabilities, about risks, right, the really awesome part of getting towards this and pushing towards resilient infrastructure is thinking about those core parts of your business that could be impacted, right? So instead of chasing, hey, this is the CV of the day, or this is the APT group leaked tactic of the day, or the scissor report of the day that went out. Instead of kind of looking outward at those reports that you're probably getting through a feed or things that vendors are sending through packs, this is really a chance to look inward. What you see on the right here, is the process for developing the information system contingency plan, right? So it starts out with developing the policy, right? Identifying regulatory requirements, developing the IT contingency planning, looking at policy, looking at everything going into this. Then what you do is a business impact analysis. Actually, on the next slide, we'll look a little bit at what that looks like. They have a really good graphic for that. You then create contingency strategies, what you're going to do, what that actually looks like, tailored to the controls and to the realities of your environment. You're going to actually develop the plan. Then you'll test the plan, you'll train it, you'll do exercises. This is where people commonly say tabletop exercises. And we're like, hey, well, what are you actually doing in a tabletop exercise, right? This is a prime case to where a tabletop exercise can actually see, okay, how good is this plan? How, verbose, how accurate is this plan to my environment, right? And so tabletop exercises, even real exercises or pen tests, other real exercises like that are really good for testing these plans. And when you do those, you should actually have people role play through and actually follow the steps of the plan. And in doing that, what you'll see is then, okay, this actually does meet this. Here's where the hangups are. This doesn't make sense. And it helps you also with that maintenance side. When you finally get into maintenance, everyone thinks like, hey, I wrote an IR policy. I wrote this plan. It's done. No, these are all living documents, right? So both as the realities of your business change, as market things change, as operations move around, these are plans that you're going to have to stay on top of, and you're always going to have to edit and change. So again, this was really a quick overview of the ISCP process. If you go into the NIST publication, true to all NIST publications, they have very verbose ways to walk through it. They have good examples. In the back of the appendices, they actually have three different FIPS levels plans, and so you can even see what they did in. As you develop this plan, though, we'll share two tables kind of in there. So as you develop the plan, you'll bring in supporting information like the business impact analysis. What the business impact analysis is, we dropped a figure they had in the NIST publication on the right there. What it is you break down business processes. So that's the green box entirely on the left of that. You then say, hey, here's the potential impacts tied to that operation. That's the purple in the middle, right? Then you have the orange right next to it, which is we can stand for this business operation to be down. What's interesting here, right? This could be a very technical business operation. If you're an industrial asset owner, this could be, hey, we cannot generate power, without this turbine controller, right? Maybe you have turbine controller impacts in there, right? If you're a refinery, maybe you're like, hey, these are the systems that run this pump house or this part this part of the hydrocracker network, right? So you can take those key business processes, you can get pretty granular, and then you can bring in both impacts you know about. Maybe you bring in an outside firm to talk on some of these impacts. And then you can say, okay, well, how long do we think we can tolerate this being down? What you then do with that is you can then tie it to system components. Hey, my domain controller, hey, this web server, hey, this database server over here. If someone hit that, none of that would run. What you do is you map those tolerable downtimes to the system components, to those actual technical components that they're connected with. That's the green kind of in the middle on the right side of the arrows. Once you get past that, you can then say, okay, well, here's the recovery time objective, right? Here's how long it would take me reasonably to do this, right? You want to be realistic here. You want to say, hey, right now we're slow on this, because what this will help you do is say, okay, here's the criticality, here's how long it can be down. And then on this side, you're like, well, this is how long it would take for me to get it back up. That's important to know. Another variable I would add in there is, how quick can you get through self-awareness through figuring out it's even a problem, right? And so if doing incident response, if doing that analysis is going to take a while, you need to factor that into the recovery time, right? It's going to take this long to identify it. It's going to take this long to bring a maintenance vendor in, or this outside group that's reliant for it, right? That recovery time needs to be inclusive of, a realistic amount of time it's going to take. Because if it's not realistic, if you're, just making it look good on paper, when it actually happens, it's not going to work out well for you most likely, or it's going to take a lot longer than you thought it would. And so that's the business impact analysis. What then you will do is take that down into the activation and notification phases, recovery phase, reconstitution phase. Those three phases of the ISCP, outlining it in that document, you're then going to have that roadmap, just like you do on the incident response plan, to say, hey, if I have to activate this, there's going to be no surprises on what my process looks like as I'm working down this. That BIA, why we talked through it so long in this video, if that BIA, again, isn't accurate, then it's going to be a cascading effect to where this plan might not be as valuable when you actually get into the meat of it, right? And so, again, NIST 834 Rev 1 contains several plan examples. And again, true to NIST documents, they do a good job of being very granular, very verbose on, providing really helpful things there. And so again, this was just a quick overview of talking about the difference between, between restoration and resilience. In a lot of ways, they overlap again, right? Resilience deals with both right of boom and left of boom, with the ability to get things back up when they go down, right? And restoration is that specifically in bit of how effectively can I do that? Why we talked about the ISCP is it's a good way to think through that restoration bit and really be critical on yourself and say, okay, well, when I'm talking about restoration, when I'm talking about the, people, process, and technology, right? That plan will help you with process. It'll also help you understand where maybe your people and your technology, either could use training, maybe you could use help, maybe you need to streamline some stuff. But thanks for joining in today. Again, we have some exciting Tech Talk Tuesdays coming up. We hope you'll tune in. This one was a little more, strategy and policy focused. We'll have some more technical ones coming later. But again, thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you back next week.